need to read works of these writers, you just remember that Green, Peele, Nash and Lilly, they are the university wits, and if a question is asked about them, they just ask who were the university wits, so among the following is a university wit, so on and so forth. Then we have Francis Bacon, who makes to the list of the writers from Elizabethan age. He is significant because he chose a very different genre to write in an age where drama dominated. He chose essays, and he wrote some significant essays, and you must be acquainted with his style of essays and with the titles of some of the essays that were famously written by him. Now, after discussing these 8 writers, I'll return back to the top of the list, that is William Shakespeare. Now, William Shakespeare is a literature in its own self. He is an age in its own self. If you put together the works of all the rest of the writers, they would equal the works written by William Shakespeare. He has written more than 36 plays. He has written 154 sonnets and 2 poems to his credit. Now, if you want to study William Shakespeare in detail, so it would take more than 2 months. And I don't advise students who are preparing for UGC NET set to study William Shakespeare for 2 months, because the contribution that William Shakespeare makes to the UGC NET papers is again 3% of the questions you will find from William Shakespeare. So how to approach William Shakespeare? Now, if you again go back to the papers, previous year UGC NET paper, you will find that Shakespeare is asked in 4 ways. 4 different questions would be asked from William Shakespeare. One is, they may ask you about the sources of William Shakespeare's plays, which is a very famous question that is asked in UGC NET paper. So if we are dealing, or if we have to deal with the sources of Shakespearean plays, it won't be that difficult task for the students. Like, you have to classify the works of William Shakespeare: comedies, tragedies and historical plays, and then you can memorize the sources of various plays. And if a question is asked on the sources, you would be fortunate, and good luck would be yours that you can mark that correctly. Secondly, they asked about the famous quotations by William Shakespeare. Now, in that case, if you remember some common quotations of William Shakespeare, like "This is Greek to me," like "To be or not to be, this is the question," like "Frailty, thy name is woman," so on and so forth, then again it's not that difficult, it's easy. But if someone thinks that he will read the text of 36 plays and then will answer the quotation or a dialogue asked from any play of William Shakespeare, that is absolutely an absurd approach, a utopian thought to have. So I will not suggest, to mark this question correctly, you waste 40 or 50 days of your time, and then there is hardly 10 to 15% of the chances that you may mark it correctly. Fourth is, they will ask you questions from sonnets, which actually is not difficult. Even if you want to read the text of Shakespearean sonnets, you can do that quite easily. 154 sonnets wouldn't be a great deal. Furthermore, even if you do not read the text, if you only know about WH, if you only know about Dark Lady, if you only know about the number of sonnets dedicated to WH and the number of sonnets dedicated to Dark Lady, this would suffice Shakespeare from sonnet. And then there is another question that is asked from William Shakespeare, that is about characters, in which play is this character or that character. Now, in that regard, you need to remember Falstaff, who has continued in 1 or 2 plays of William Shakespeare, and you need also to remember Viola, who is a significant character from 12th Night, only because she happens to be the first character who played the role of a transgender in that particular work. So this is what we had from Elizabethan age. And up next we have Jacobean age, and in Jacobean age I have included Ben Jonson, which may be questionable also, because Ben Jonson is born in 1570s, 72 or 74, and he writes even before 1600, and he mostly writes post 1600. And since most of his writings are there in the Jacobean age, and even his style does not suggest too much of the Elizabethan style of writing, like how Shakespeare wrote or how Christopher Marlowe wrote, you will find Ben Jonson writes on a different platform, in a different form, like he has his own comedy of humors. So I chose him to place in the list of the Jacobean writers. After him we have George Webster, who actually represents the decadence of British Elizabethan drama, and he's famous actually for his White Devil and the Duchess of Malfi. And next I have included John Donne, Herbert and Marvell in the list of the writers from Jacobean age. Now again, this is very typical whether I should have done this or not, because again John Donne is born somewhere in 1570s, and even this Herbert and Marvell, even Marvell is born in 609. I will talk about him later. But since most of the writings of these writers that appear in actually a Jacobean age, John Donne writes most of his works in 1610s or 1620s, and in 1630 he dies. So he somewhat, I excluded him from the list of Elizabethan times and put him in the Jacobean age. So was the case with George Herbert, and because both of these are from the same school of thought, that is metaphysical school of thought, though I found them fit to put them in the list of writers from Jacobean age. And then there is Andrew Marvell, which was very tricky actually to classify. Like, it can be objectionable, it can be questionable that should I have put Andrew Marvell here, or should I have chosen him to be in the list of writers from Puritan age, because remember he is born in 1609 and later he becomes the secretary of John Milton, and John Milton writes in Puritan age, but I have placed him in the list of Jacobean writers. Reason is because ideologically he matches with these metaphysical poets. So having this ideological relationship with these poets, I have chosen him to be in the Jacobean age, and he does not provide a lot of matter on the Puritan thought or what was going on actually in the Puritan age, which was represented by John Milton. So I found it fit in Jacobean age. And if you think that he should not be in Jacobean age, you can put him in the list of writers from Puritan age. Now coming to the Puritan age, this age is also known as Miltonic age. So it's represented by none other than John Milton, and we have John Bunyan, the other writer, actually novelist, who represented Puritan ideology. Now when we talk about Puritan age, if the contribution from Puritan age is around 4%, 100% comes from John Milton, and 90% comes from Paradise Lost. So I would rather suggest the students who are preparing for UGC NET said that from Puritan age they have to study in detail Paradise Lost and Areopagitica, and from John Bunyan they must be aware about Pilgrim's Progress. They should deal in detail with Pilgrim's Progress, and these two writers would be sufficient if you are dealing with Elizabethan age, with Puritan age. And then I have included two writers, Crashaw and Baxter, who are the poets who wrote in this age. They are not significant writers, but still you must know the names of these two writers. They might be here and then commenting on the style of John Donne, commenting on Ben Jonson and others. So that's how they make to the list. Now if you have a look at this slide, you will find that these are the writers that you have to deal with actually in the ages from Chaucer to Puritan age. You have 4 writers from Chaucerian age, you have 9 writers from Elizabethan age, you have 5 writers from Jacobean age, and you have mostly only 2 writers actually from Puritan age. So which means that you have some 9 plus 4 is 13, 18 and 20 writers from over a period of 320 years, which should not be a tough task for the students who are preparing for NET Set English. And this period, these 4 ages contribute around 15 to 18% of UGC NET exam. Now up next we would be dealing with ages from Restoration to 20th century, and in next slide I will be talking about the writers from Restoration to the Romantic age, because as we move ahead we find that the number of writers keeps on increasing, so it would be actually difficult for me to include all those writers in one slide. So here we have Restoration age, we have Augustan age, we have Romantic age, we have Victorian age, and we have 20th century. Now Restoration age begins with the restoration of monarchy in England in 1660 up to 1700. Augustan age is from 1700 to 1780. Romantic age is a short time period from 1780 to 1832. Victorian age from 1832 to 1900, and then 20th century from 1900 and onwards. Now in Restoration age we have John Dryden, we have William Congreve, we have George Etheridge, we have William Wycherley, we have Vanbrugh, and we have Aphra Behn. Now you find in this list is being led by John Dryden, and this age is also known as Dryden's age. There is a time period of 20 or 30 years which is excluded from Augustan and Restoration age and is exclusively known as a Dryden's age, but I have put him in the Restoration age because he is born in 1630, and most of these writers who write in Restoration age, John Dryden, Etheridge, Wycherley, Vanbrugh, Aphra Behn, all of them are born in the decade of 1630s. Now in this list you will find John Dryden at the top, who is a multi-talented writer. He wrote plays in the form of The Fall of Grenada, The Hind and the Panther. He wrote poems like Absalom and Achitophel. He wrote Macflacon, the famous satire on Thomas Shadwell, and then he wrote an essay on the criticism that was an essay on dramatic poesy. And then you have William Congreve, Etheridge, Wycherley, and Vanbrugh. These four writers, they represent the Restoration comedy, which actually was the flourishing genre in Restoration age. And down in the list you have Aphra Behn. She is a female writer, rather the first female writer to write in English, and she is known for the play Oroonoko. I don't know if I have pronounced it correctly or not, and often than not she is asked. Now then next we have Augustan age, and it's again called the age of Pope. Then you have Henry Fielding, you have Smollett, you have Richardson, you have Sterne. Then you have Daniel Defoe making the list. Then you have Jonathan Swift, you have Richard Steele, Joseph Addison. Now this is what we have from Augustan age, led by Alexander Pope, known as the age of Pope. He is a poet who represents the neoclassical thought, and you must know about his The Rape of the Lock, Epistles to Dr. Arbuthnot, and Essay on Criticism, which actually are his three renowned works. He also attempted his hand on writing drama with his with the title as Cato. After Alexander Pope, we have Four Wheels of British novel, and it was here that novel began, and it is going to dominate now in Victorian age. And we have Henry Fielding, Smollett, Richardson, and Sterne, and you have to read these four writers diligently, in detail, because questions are asked from these people. And why not? They were the first novelists to write in British language, and they are actually known as Four Wheels of British. And then there is Daniel Defoe, who actually wrote novels, and you might be acquainted with his novel Moll Flanders, but he is not considered a full-fledged novelist, just like that of John Bunyan, but still he makes that to the list, and you have to study him. Then we have three essayists in the form of Jonathan Swift, who is a satirist, known for The Battle of Books, known for Gulliver Travel, known for The Modest Proposal. And then we have Richard Steele and Joseph Addison, who would begin the journals in the form of Spectator and Tatler, both very significant. Now after Augustan age, is the Romantic Age, and again it's led by William Wordsworth. And then you have Samuel Taylor Coleridge, we have John Keats, P.B. Shelley, Lord Byron, we have Robert Southey, we have William Blake, we have Robert Burns, we have Jane Austen, we have Walter Scott, Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley, Thomas Carlyle, William Hazlitt, Thomas D. Quincy, and Charles Lamb. Now the number of writers has increased primarily in Romantic Age. However, this age is only in a time period of 50 years or so, and is dominated by poets, primarily the Romantic poets. You have William Wordsworth at the top of the list, then you have Samuel Taylor Coleridge, then these three young guns of Romantic Age, John Keats, P.B. Shelley, and Lord Byron, who unfortunately all of them died at a very young age. Then we have Robert Southey, the Lake poet. Then we have William Blake. He actually is a pre-romantic, but finds his place down in the list among the Romantic writers, primarily because he was included in the list of Romantic writers, late. In the 20th century, the critics found him to have a huge relevance with these Romantic writers. So then he was included, and he was known as a pre-Romantic poet. Then we have Robert Burns, a minor Romantic poet. And then we have two significant writers, Jane Austen, the first female full-fledged novelist. And then we have Walter Scott. Now in a Romantic Age, the novel that actually flourished in Augustan age diminished in the Romantic Age, and we find there were only two novelists who wrote in this age, Jane Austen and Walter Scott. And then we have Mary Wollstonecraft, the feminist, writing Vindication of the Rights of Women. And then we have Mary Shelley, the wife of P.B. Shelley, writing Frankenstein, a very significant novel published around 1800. And then we have Thomas Carlyle, again representing the essays, William Hazlitt, an essayist, Thomas D. Quincy, an essayist, and Charles Lamb, an essayist. And that is what we have from these three ages, that is Augustan, Restoration, Augustan, and Romantic. From Augustan age we have Dryden, we have Etheridge, we have Congreve, we have Wycherley, we have Vanbrugh, we have Aphra Behn, some 6 writers. And from Augustan age we have 8 writers. And then from 31 writers that you have to study from 1660 to 1832. And up next we have another significant age, and that is Victorian age. Now Victorian age, or the literature from post-Victorian era, is significant. The contribution jumps to around 60% or 55% in paper 2 and around 66% in paper 3 when it comes to the time period of post-Victorian literature. Now since we are dealing with paper 2, so we would be restricting ourselves only to the British literature. So the writers from Victorian age on your screen are Charles Darwin, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Gaskell, William Makepeace Thackeray, Harriet Stowe Smith, Robert Browning, Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, Charles Dickens, Karl Marx. We have Grant Eliot, not Grant Eliot, but George Eliot. We have Ruskin, we have Matthew Arnold, we have D.J. Rossetti, we have George Meredith, we have again Rossetti's name has been actually repeated in the list. We have Thomas Hardy, we have Henry James, we have Gerald Manley Hopkins, we have Kate Chopin, we have A.C. Bradley, the critic of William Shakespeare, we have Oscar Wilde, we have Fraser, and we have George Bernard Shaw. Now if you have a look at Karl Marx, then we have an essayist in the form of Ruskin, and then we have playwrights like George Bernard Shaw and Oscar Wilde. So that is what we had from Chaucerian age up to Victorian age. So when, if you think that you want to prepare for UGC NET exam, this, I hope this lecture will be very hopeful, will be rather very helpful to you, about, because it gives a detailed information about the writers that you need to take up, about the ages that you need to study, about about the important ages which you have to take up, which you have to skip, is all given in detail. Though I have not mentioned about the works of these writers, which I will come up in with individual videos of each writer, that what you have to study from individual writers. And up next I will be talking about 20th century, the modern period and the post-modern period. I hope you liked this video. Thank you for watching.